The day my first novel hit the bestseller list, I was working a double shift at a diner, serving pancakes to strangers who had no idea the woman whose name was on that cover was pouring their coffee. I watched the announcement on a small television above the counter, my hands trembling as I saw my title flash across the screen. Number 7, then number 5, then number 3. By the end of the week, it was number 1, and I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't celebrate. I couldn't even claim it, because the name on that cover wasn't mine. My name is Celeste Thorne, and for 5 years, I was the invisible writer behind one of the most successful authors in the world. Julian Croft was his name, a handsome, charismatic man who had never written a word in his life. He was a former literary agent who had stumbled onto a scheme that made him millions. Find talented but desperate writers, promise them the world, then take their work and publish it under his own name. I was his first victim. I was also his last. I met Julian at a writers' conference in New York 6 years ago. I was 24, fresh out of an MFA program, drowning in debt and rejection letters. I had been writing since I could hold a pen, pouring my heart into stories that no one wanted. Julian was charming, successful, and deeply interested in my work. He read my manuscript, a literary novel about a family torn apart by secrets, and told me it was the best thing he had read in years. He offered to represent me, to find a publisher, to make my dreams come true. I was ecstatic. I was grateful. I was blind. The contract he gave me was thick, dense, full of legal language I didn't understand. He assured me it was standard, that all his clients signed the same thing. I signed without reading. I was too desperate, too trusting, too young to know better. He took my manuscript, shopped it to publishers, and came back with an offer that seemed too good to be true. A 6-figure advance, a major publishing house. I signed again, never noticing that the contract gave him ownership of my work, my name, my future. The book was published 6 months later, but the name on the cover wasn't mine. It was his, Julian Croft, the brilliant new voice in literary fiction. I called him, screaming, demanding an explanation. He was calm, patient, utterly unruffled. "Read your contract, Celeste," he said. "You signed away your rights. The book is mine. The money is mine. The fame is mine. You're just the writer. I'm the author." I read the contract. He was right. I had signed away everything. My work, my future, my identity. I was a ghost. I tried to fight. I hired lawyers, spent my savings, begged for help. But Julian had covered his tracks too well. The contracts were legal, the signatures were mine, and he had the resources to outlast me. I lost. I lost everything. The book became a sensation, then a phenomenon. Julian was interviewed on television, profiled in magazines, celebrated as a genius. He wrote more books, each one stolen from another desperate writer, each one a success. He built an empire on the backs of people like me, invisible and forgotten. I sank into a depression that lasted 2 years. I moved back with my mother, worked odd jobs, stopped writing entirely. The words that had once flowed through me dried up, poisoned by betrayal. I couldn't even look at a blank page without feeling sick. I thought about giving up, about letting him win. But something kept me going, something small and stubborn buried deep in my chest. Rage. I started watching him. I followed his career, his interviews, his public appearances. I learned everything about him, his habits, his weaknesses, his secrets. I discovered that he was still finding new writers, still stealing their work, still destroying lives. He had a system, a network of scouts who found talented but vulnerable writers and brought them to him. He was a predator, and his prey were people like me. I also discovered that he was careless. He kept records, digital files, email trails that documented every theft. He was arrogant enough to believe he was untouchable. He was wrong. I spent the next 3 years building my case. I tracked down other victims, writers whose work he had stolen, whose lives he had destroyed. There were dozens of us scattered across the country, each carrying our own pain. I reached out to them carefully, anonymously at first, then directly once trust was established. We shared our stories, our evidence, our rage. We became a network, a family of ghosts, waiting for the moment to strike. The moment came when Julian announced his magnum opus, a novel he claimed had taken him a decade to write. It was his most ambitious project, yet a sprawling epic guaranteed to be a massive success. The publisher was planning a huge launch, a media blitz, a nationwide tour. It was going to be his crowning achievement. It was also going to be his downfall, because the real author of that book was a woman named Sarah, a brilliant writer who had trusted Julian the same way I had. She had given him her manuscript, signed his contract, and watched as he claimed her work. She had been too broken to fight, too defeated to speak. Until I found her, until we found each other. We planned for months, working in secret, building a case that would destroy him. We gathered evidence, documented every theft, every lie, every ruined life. We contacted journalists, lawyers, anyone who might help. And we waited. That moment came on the night of his book launch, a glittering event at a prestigious Manhattan venue. The who's who of the literary world were there, celebrating the genius of Julian Croft. I was there too, hidden in the crowd, invisible, forgotten. I watched him take the stage, smiling, basking in adulation. I watched him begin his speech, thanking his fans, his publisher, his muse. And then I watched as Sarah walked onto the stage behind him, a microphone in her hand, a folder of evidence in the other. "Excuse me, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The room went silent. Julian turned, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally horror. Sarah held up the folder. "This book you're celebrating tonight, I wrote it, every word, and I have the proof." The chaos that followed was beautiful. Journalists rushed forward. Cameras flashed. Julian stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him. I watched from the shadows, tears streaming, and felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. Julian was arrested that night, charged with fraud and theft. The investigation revealed the full extent of his crimes, the dozens of writers he had destroyed, the millions he had stolen. He was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. His books were pulled from shelves, his reputation destroyed. He was finished. I stood outside the courthouse on the day of his sentencing, surrounded by the other writers he had hurt. We didn't celebrate. We just stood together, silent and strong. One of them, a young woman I had never met, turned to me and whispered, "What do we do now?" I looked at her, at all of them, and I knew the answer. We write. We write our own stories, and we never let anyone take them from us again. That was 5 years ago. Today, I have published 3 novels under my own name. They haven't been bestsellers, not yet, but they're mine. I still think about Julian sometimes, sitting in his prison cell, wondering how it all went wrong. I don't feel sorry for him. He made his choices. I made mine. The ghostwriter is no longer a ghost. I am Celeste Thorne, and I am finally completely seen. The months after Julian's conviction were a blur of interviews, legal battles, and emotional reckoning. Sarah and I became the faces of a movement, speaking at conferences, appearing on television, telling our stories to anyone who would listen. Journalists called us heroes, survivors, voices for the voiceless. But inside, I was still processing, still healing, still learning to trust again. The attention was overwhelming, sometimes suffocating, but I knew it was necessary. If our stories could save even one writer from falling into the same trap, it was worth it. I moved out of my mother's house and into a small apartment of my own. It was modest, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I filled it with books, my books, the ones I had written under my own name. Seeing them on my shelf, their spines facing out, their titles visible, was a daily reminder that I had survived. I had reclaimed my identity. I was no longer a ghost. But the healing wasn't linear. There were nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, dreaming of Julian's smile, his calm voice, his utter lack of remorse. There were days when I stared at a blank page, paralyzed by fear that someone would steal my words again. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman, who helped me understand that the trauma of betrayal doesn't disappear just because justice has been served. It lingers like a shadow, waiting for moments of weakness to reassert itself. Sarah became my anchor. We talked almost every day, sharing our struggles, our victories, our fears. She was younger than me, only 28, but she had a wisdom beyond her years. She had been through the same hell I had. And somehow, she still believed in the power of words. She was working on a novel of her own, her first since Julian had stolen her manuscript. She sent me chapters as she wrote them, and I read them with tears in my eyes. They were beautiful, raw, honest. She was going to be okay. We both were. The civil lawsuits took another 2 years to resolve. Julian's assets were seized, liquidated, and distributed to his victims. There were 43 of us in total, writers whose work he had stolen over 2 decades. The amounts varied based on how much he had taken, but even the smallest settlement was enough to change lives. I used my share to start a foundation, a nonprofit that provides legal support and financial assistance to writers who have been exploited by predatory agents and publishers. We called it the Ghostwriter Project, a name that honored our past while looking toward the future. The foundation became my life's work. I traveled across the country, meeting with writers, hearing their stories, helping them navigate the treacherous waters of the publishing industry. I testified before Congress, advocating for stronger laws to protect creators from exploitation. I wrote op-eds, gave keynote speeches, became a voice for a community that had long been silenced. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and deeply meaningful. Through it all, I kept writing. My 4th novel was published 2 years after Julian's conviction, and it was my most personal yet. It was about a woman who loses everything, who spends years in the wilderness, and who finally finds her way back to herself. Critics called it my best work, a mature and moving exploration of loss and redemption. I dedicated it to Sarah and to every writer who had ever been told their voice didn't matter. Julian's appeals were denied, one after another. He remains in prison, serving out his sentence, a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can profit from others' pain. I don't visit him. I don't write to him. I don't think about him, except when I'm speaking to a group of young writers, warning them about predators like him. He is a footnote in my story, a necessary evil that led me to where I am today. Sarah's first novel was published last year. It debuted at number 6 on the bestseller list, and I was there at her launch party, crying tears of joy as she signed copies for a line of readers that stretched around the block. She dedicated it to me with a note that said, "To Celeste, who found me in the darkness and taught me that our voices matter." I keep that book on a special shelf next to the photo of us taken that night, both of us smiling, both of us free. The Ghostwriter Project has helped over 100 writers in the past 3 years. We've funded legal battles, provided grants, and created a community of support that spans the country. We've also started a mentorship program, pairing experienced authors with emerging writers, helping them navigate the industry without falling into the traps that caught us. It's not enough. It will never be enough, but it's something. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still wake up in the dark, heart pounding, convinced that Julian is standing over me, smiling that cold smile. But the nightmares are less frequent now, and when they come, I know how to handle them. I get up, make tea, and write. I write about the dream, about the fear, about the journey from victim to victor. I write until the sun comes up, until the words have exorcised the demons, until I feel whole again. Last month, I received a letter from Julian. It was the first time he had reached out since his conviction. The envelope was plain, the handwriting shaky, as if his hands had aged decades in the past few years. I almost threw it away, but something made me open it. Inside was a single page, covered in his cramped script. He wrote about regret, about remorse, about the years he had spent in prison reflecting on what he had done. He asked for my forgiveness. He said he was sorry. I read the letter 3 times, searching for any sign of sincerity, any hint that he had truly changed. I didn't find it. What I found was a man who had finally been caught, who was facing the consequences of his actions, and who wanted to ease his own conscience. There was nothing in it about the writers he had hurt, the lives he had destroyed, the dreams he had crushed. It was all about him. I wrote back, just one sentence. Forgiveness is not mine to give. It belongs to every writer whose words you stole. Ask them. I never heard from him again. I don't know if that was the right response. I don't know if forgiveness is something I should strive for, or if it's something I'm allowed to withhold. What I know is that I have made peace with my past. I have built a life that honors my pain and my triumph. I have helped others find their voices, their power, their futures. And I have written my own story on my own terms with my own name on the cover. The ghostwriter is no longer a ghost. I am Celeste Thorne, and I am here. I am visible. I am whole. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that no writer ever has to disappear the way I did. That is my mission. That is my legacy. That is my revenge.